Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and today we're going to talk about understanding Modern Warfare 2 audio. I made a PowerPoint this time because I am totally serious about this. In all seriousness, this took like 3 or 4 days of work. I was measuring the game sounds, analyzing the audio and software, messing around with different headphones, headsets, DACs, audio settings in game, you name it. I was really trying to understand Modern Warfare 2 as much as I could before making this video. So with that being said, although I base a lot of my opinions on measurements, scientific testing, etc., this assessment is based off of my own conclusions. It's not a matter of fact, so you may have a different thought process or preference, and that's totally fine. So just keep that in mind. This is just an opinion. The goal of this video is to help you understand Modern Warfare 2 audio, get the best settings out of it, or at least what you think are the best settings for yourself, in addition to just me telling you, hey, this is a good preset for Modern Warfare 2, because you really have to know what the settings mean to get the most out of it so you know how to fix it or change it to your preference. So with that being said, let's go to the slide deck. And yeah, nice fancy title screen. So here's where it gets kind of crazy. Now, I measured the game in a lot of different ways, as I mentioned. And the most important thing or most divisive thing I've seen on the internet and online and whatever I'm looking at is the differences in audio presets in Modern Warfare 2. How does that affect the sound? Well, you have two front runners. You have the headphone preset and home theater preset. And I've seen almost a 50-50 split on recommending one over the other. So you can see that measurably they're different. This is the same exact point in the game. I had my friend help me in a private match. We kind of recreated the same things over and over and over. I kept measuring it, etc. So what does this all mean? Well, the biggest difference with the audio presets has to do with what's called dynamic range. And they mention that loosely in the description, but dynamic range is basically your loudest point to your most quiet point. I'm simplifying some of this, but again, I want to help you understand what all this does. Now, there's pros and cons to a wide versus narrow dynamic range. There's benefits depending on the situation. So I'm going to flat out tell you right now, you're going to want to try both. And by the end of this little section of the slide deck, you're going to know when to try both. So I'll explain this whole dips and valley thing in a minute here. But when you're in home theater mode, the home theater preset can have about 15 to 20 decibels of dynamic range on the quieter parts. So you can see that what I did here with this measurement, these are the differences of the ambient sound down here at the bottom versus the sounds in the distance when there are footsteps. So when you look at footstep audio versus background noise, that is how much of a change you get. Now, conversely, when you go to a headset preset, the headset has a smaller dynamic range of only 5 to 10 decibels. So again, going back a slide, from 15 to 20 to 5 to 10 decibels. What that means, again, is your ambient noise is now louder. So if people are way off in the distance and they're shooting a gun, the headset preset means you're going to hear those gunshots much louder than the home theater mode, which could be good if you're trying to help get an idea how, where someone is off in a distance. But the downside of that is when there's a footstep really close, the footstep isn't much louder than your background noise. It starts to compete. The noise coming from a steam pipe next to you or water splashing or a door creaking is all boosted in the headset mode. Now, because of the more narrow dynamic range, that means if the game is completely silent and there's no other noise to compete with, the headset preset means that footsteps will be louder in the distance. So if someone's 50 meters away and your headset's turned up, you're more likely to hear it louder on the headset preset. The issue is when there's an airstrike, when there's tons of gunfire, and all of that's happening 30 to 50 meters away, they are really loud. And that means anyone that's approaching you, it's now harder to hear the difference because it's competing with all that noise. Whereas the home theater preset, all of that stuff is noticeably quieter. Footsteps are quieter as well at a distance, but when footsteps get closer to you, the audio ramps up and it stands out more against all the background stuff. So in a lot of cases, the home theater preset can actually be better. So what does this mean? So I just want to explain what this graph actually does. And the blue, the light blue at the very bottom, and the stronger blue towards the top, that's the home theater preset when you compare ambient noise versus a footstep. This is the frequency measurements of a footstep walking by right in front of me. And you can see there's massive decibel change from here to here. This is how off or how much louder a footstep will stand out. Now, if I'm in dynamic mode, the ambient noise at this frequency is much higher. It's actually minus 50 decibels, and we're going all the way up to minus 20 decibels up here when there's a footstep. So yes, the footsteps are louder in headset mode. However, if again, there's gunfire and other things happening, everything else is louder with it. So here's where I'm going to help you decide what to pick. If you're playing a very chaotic game where there's nonstop airstrikes, grenades, explosions, etc., and you tend to play close quarter and you're only concerned with footsteps nearby, go to the home theater preset. It will help dull a lot of that noise. Conversely, if you're playing super competitive, whether it's hardcore or when they eventually add it, or you're playing search and destroy type things, if there's less happening because people are either camping or they're being more tactical, you'll want to do the headset preset because it's going to boost all of that subtle noise more. So the end of the day, there isn't a right one. It's going to depend on what you're playing and how that game is going, and that'll make the most out of your audio in Modern Warfare. So I'm going to show you briefly how to make a few audio changes in Modern Warfare 2. So the audio mix, I typically play home theater. I like the dynamic range, but again, if I want to have everything louder, I'll step up to headset. Master volume, I turn down just slightly to 96. It's the whole game volume is not maxed out. I minimize it just a little bit because in the past I've noticed some headsets or DACs I've tested, they clip out. When the signal gets too loud, you have a little bit of distortion and it's not as clean. So I just pull down the volume slightly to give myself a little bit more overhead for something like an Astro mix amp. Music volume I set to 0, even though the music's fun and all. For multiplayer, the less your headset is trying to produce, the more accurately and cleanly it produces what you want it to make. So if you just want to hear footsteps, I don't want extra music in the background. It's going to add too much noise and junk that I don't need. Dialogue volume. So the dialogue in this game is really loud and they're constantly talking. You know, enemy over there, grenade out, they're screaming when they get shot. So I lower the dialogue volume a lot. Again, I'm trying to get rid of the stuff I care less about or drastically reduce it so the effects I do care about, like footsteps, stand out to me. Effects volume, that is your footsteps, your airstrikes. It's all under 1. So we're going to leave that at 100. Hit marker volume, admittedly mine's a little high. You can bring it down to about 50 and still hear things fine. I use a sniper a lot and hit markers aren't really a distracting thing for me, so I haven't really cared. Mono audio, leave off if you enable that. I don't care what the description says. Enabling it makes the left and right produce the exact same sound. You don't want that. So let's go to the next one. Now there's one thing, if you go to audio advanced settings at the bottom and expand it, there's an option for reduced tinnitus sound. This was actually like part of custom EQ presets on older games, like CSGO in the Sonar preset. They have specific frequencies they target to reduce the ringing effect of a flashbang, for example. And when you have that, even though it sounds more realistic, one, if you play it very loudly, that's not good for your ears. Some people with legitimate tinnitus can't play the games loudly unless they have a setting like this. So one, huge thanks to Infinity Ward for offering that for an accessibility means. But even if you don't have tinnitus, I would strongly recommend turning it on because it's going to dull the sound effect of a flash grenade, gunfire nearby, etc. If you get hit, it reduces all of that. And again, that means you have a more clean audio mix for the stuff you care about. Because let's face it, if you're flashed, you don't care to hear the ringing. You're going to see all white anyway, so you might as well at least hear a footstep. So that's an easy one. Now I'm going to do a real quick little tip to help you on the video side. This is just a bonus thing. If you're playing on console, these settings are for console and PC. I'm not going to get into detail and texture settings for graphics performance. There's other people that'll do that. But on console and PC, I strongly suggest in post-processing effects, turning off motion blur, turn off weapon blur, reduce film grain to 0, depth of field turn off. All of these things clear up the picture. It may not look as photorealistic, but I don't care. I'm playing a game. I want to see the enemy, and when I'm running, I don't want things to look blurry. Now there's another setting. Everyone's excited for next gen that you have field of view. Mine's set to 95 as you see, but if you expand field of view and under the advanced settings, it says ADS field of view. If you set it to independent, when you aim down sight, it actually tightens up your field of view, making it easier to spot people at a distance. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but try messing with those settings. I think it helps a lot with clarity because sight is just as important as sound, obviously, when you're playing a game like this. Now everyone's favorite part, tuning your headset to hear footsteps better. So let's talk about this. This is a common misconception or I guess understanding that I'm trying to change in the gaming community. You can't use one gaming preset to address every single headset out there. It doesn't work that way. And I'll show you why in a measurement in a moment, but I want to stress that yes, you can use a baseline preset that's focused on a particular game. However, keep in mind that your headset may sound differently than the one that profile was created on. So here's an example. Now I measure a lot of headsets. I don't share all of my measurements yet because my headphone measuring rig isn't the most accurate in the upper treble. It can be close, but it's inconsistent. I have a much more expensive realistic rig coming, and from there I can post measurements of like every headset. I'm going to be doing a big thing with that later. But for now, I just want to show you this. So I have a Nova Pro wired. I have the EPOS H6 Pro, the Razer Black Shark V2 Pro, and the Stealth 700 G2. Even if you ignore the treble differences, the bass and mid-range are completely different on all four. So if you use one generic audio preset, they're all going to sound different, and you can't tune it the same way and expect the same exact sound. It doesn't work that way because what you're doing is modifying the headset's sound profile. You're not telling the headset exactly how to sound. So to explain that further, lifting or boosting 60 hertz by 6 decibels. So if I use my little mouse pointer here and I go to 60 hertz and I boost the Nova wired, the Nova Pro, that has a dip at 60 hertz. So boosting it 6 decibel is only going to make it sound closer to how the 700 Gen 2 does out of the box. So I would tune those very differently from each other. And then the same thing applies, when you're looking at, let me turn my camera off for this part. The same shortcoming applies when you're using EQ presets. Again, baseline only. If you add bass to a bass-heavy headset, it's going to be too much. If you have a headset that has way too much treble, it's very sharp sounding, boosting treble is going to hurt you. You get ear fatigue. It's like a treble cannon stabbing your eardrums, and then you turn it down, or it just doesn't sound right. So I just want to start with that because it's going to make more sense when I show you these presets. So this graph should look familiar. This is what I started with, but basically what it came down to is the primary footstep frequency spike that I measured was about 111 hertz. I did a lot of tests, and it was always between like 110 to 111 hertz whenever footsteps ran by. There was also a slight lift at 870 hertz. So naturally, I want to look for headsets that either naturally excel in those frequency ranges, otherwise I'm going to tune that to make it stand out. The big thing I want to take away is if you notice, if you go to the left, all of this stuff here, let's go to the next slide. I highlighted it in red because you can see that there's not a lot going on there when it comes to just footsteps. If someone throws a grenade or a plane crashes and you want to hear the explosion and the rumble and make it sound more immersive, then leave that sub bass turned on. Don't tune that out and it'll sound, I guess, more realistic. However, whenever a headset or a speaker is trying to produce frequencies that you don't need it to, in this case, if you're really focused on footsteps, you want to take away some of that bass and that effect because it's taking away from the clarity and I guess making the footsteps stand out more because it's trying to do other stuff at the same time. So I usually drop the lower bass on first-person shooters if I'm really trying to get competitive. So when you're doing your custom EQ tuning, roll that deep bass off. From there, tuning any other frequency is more for preference. Those are the two that primarily stood out for footsteps. And I don't like boosting a lot of the other stuff specific to a game because a lot of sound effects and footsteps overlap each other when you get into the higher frequencies. Because Modern Warfare 2 has that tinnitus setting where it reduces the ringing of grenades, I don't have to hyper focus on like the 3000 hertz area or whatever frequency those grenades would have been. I just disabled it in Modern Warfare 2, and now I don't have to worry about it anymore. I did notice that this game doesn't have a ton of sharpness and airiness to it, which is kind of nice. It's easy to listen to. If you want things to sound a little bit more crispy and sharp, you can add a few decibels to the upper frequencies, like 10,000 hertz and up. I've seen some tunes where it targets closer to 7,000 hertz, but that can get kind of dangerous because some headsets are very bright in that range, and if you boost those, it'll get way too sharp. So you can play with it, but again, this is the whole point I'm trying to make, is it depends on your headset. So now I want to show you a few different software or programs that I use for EQ tuning. On PC, I typically recommend Sonar now. I used to like either Dolby Atmos for the simple side or Equalizer APO plus the Piece add-on for computer tuning, because those had parametric EQs. You can really customize the sound. Now that Sonar came out, it's like a mix of both. It's fairly easy to use, and it's extremely effective, and the latency impact is fairly minimal, so it's not going to drastically hurt your sound. So that being said, the first thing I did was I reduced the sub bass. Now, if you notice this little label right here, when you're working with Sonar, you can switch what kind of dot or adjustment you're making. If you do low shelving, what I'm basically doing by doing minus 11 dB at 60 hertz is I'm rolling off all of the sub bass. I'm making it so the headset focuses more on the mid-range and mid-bass, upper bass. That way I'm not taking away from the clarity. This alone is one of the most important settings for FPS. Now, I already mentioned the whole 110 hertz thing. This says 109.4 because I tend to mess with stuff a lot. But if you just target 110 hertz and boost it, again, this is based on like a Nova Pro. So if you have a different headset that's really boosted in this range already, you can do that and still boost it by a few dBs, but the next setting will actually be just as important as the sub bass. And what I mean by all of this is if you have a headset that has tons of bass, focus on lowering the sub bass, leaving this peak or adding a small peak at 110 hertz, and then when you get to like 155 to 165, drop it by a little bit, and it's going to hyper focus again on the primary footstep noise and reduce some of the clutter around that frequency, making footsteps stand out more. And then going to the next part. So this, I just did this to help control on the shape of how the sound is returning back to zero. So at 248 hertz, 0 dB with a 4Q. For those wondering what Q is, that's how wide or narrow your notch is. So if I had a higher number on Q, this little slope right here wouldn't be as wide. It would be more pointy because I'm only targeting a more narrow range. So going to the next one, 870 hertz, I boosted it at 3 dB with a Q of 2. The next two are zeros, but again, I'm using it to shape a flat band. So when you get to 2 kilohertz, I left it at 0. This is based off the Nova Pro. If you have a headset that measures differently, you may play with this to help fix dips. And I have some other headset reviews I've done that cover some of those, but I'll have more down the road. 4 kilohertz, I left at 0. Now, typically on the Nova, I boosted this on my original tune to fill a dip that it had, but I didn't like the way it worked on Modern Warfare 2. So I left it at 0 here. I don't like ear fatigue. I don't like things too sharp, because then it makes me turn the gain down. And I did do a slight lift, so I did a 5 decibel gain, and you can see here it says high shelving. So all of the others, if I go back, they say peaking EQ. That's the setting you need to do to make your changes the way I'm showing you here. But on the very left and then the far right, you use shelving, 5 dB at 7.75 kilohertz. When you type that in, type 7750 because it's 7,750 hertz. And a Q of 7.07, so it's a nice smooth roll up. It's not too drastic of a change. This setting helped. It's not a game changer. None of these are going to totally change the way your headset sounds and make it completely different, but this made headsets more effective. And this tune worked on a lot of different ones because of the way it's set up. Now, if you play on console, I'm not forgetting about you. So if you're using a Nova Pro, wired or wireless, you have the game DAC to work with, whether it's the wireless one like this or the wired variant. What I did was something similar. You know, I was boosting different frequencies. So the left side was my standard tune for the DAC. This is to make the headset sound better specifically for music. I wanted to show you the difference between my general tune that works, in my opinion, really well with everything. Then on the right, I have a tune optimized specifically for Modern Warfare 2. So again, I reduced sub bass, 31 hertz, -6. 62, I did -1. Because the Nova already has a dip in the 60s, I didn't have to drop it that much. 125, that's the closest thing I can get to the 110 hertz footstep. I boosted that to 4.5. 250 is at 0. 500 is at 2.5. 1K is at -0.5. 2K is at -2. 4K I did boost slightly on the DAC. And then 8K I actually dropped a little bit. You can adjust it. The DAC just performs slightly differently than Sonar, but I typically on the console side, I didn't boost the highs as much because this is specific for my Nova, whereas my Sonar tune worked with a lot of different headsets. So this is a little bit more targeted, but again, something like this is what you would do on a Nova headset if you're playing on console. Then you go to Astro. So I did something similar here. So I have a Modern Warfare 2 preset. I typed in 80 hertz. So if you go to the advanced settings, this little button right here, you can customize your preset exactly what you want. So let's open that up. So I did 80 hertz, -6 dB. At 110 hertz, I boosted it by 5 decibels, and I set my Q at 2.3, the XCSF. At 870, I boosted it by 3 dB, 2.5 Q. This is, again, particular to how I was hearing it on the Astro A40s and A50s. I boosted 4,400 hertz by 2 decibels. And at 7,200 hertz, at the very end on the far right, I boosted it by 5 decibels. This made the game sound really good. It never hurt my ears or anything, but again, I fixed some of the bass tuning to help focus more on the footsteps, and it just cleaned up that. It makes it easier to identify where they're coming from. So going into Dolby Atmos, again, this is a tune that works on console and on PC. So if you don't want to use Sonar, you can do something like this. And you should see a similar theme here. I'm not going to redo all of this, but I use the lines as a reference because they don't actually show you the value. I reduced 32 hertz, slowly ramped up at 64. At 125, which is real close to footsteps, I boosted that. That's more like 4.5 or 5. I reduced the 250 to clear up some of the muddiness so the footsteps are more pronounced. Boosted the mid-range slightly because, again, it depends on what headset you use, but this often helps me for hearing that secondary frequency of footsteps. I reduced the 4K a little bit on this to help clean up the footstep sounds. Otherwise, at 4K is like the shouty sound. So if you find a headset is too shouty, lower 4K. And it makes it a little bit easier for you to hear everything. It can sound more natural to what it sounds like in real life. And then 8 and 16 kilohertz, I boosted again to add that airiness and wake it up a little bit. The most important thing here, though, again, is this whole bass tuning and leaving the surround virtualizer off because it can mess up your sound, in my opinion. Which leads us into virtual sound. So you can leave Sony's Tempest 3D audio on. The 3D audio setting on Sony PlayStation, leave it on, that's fine. On Dolby Atmos, just turn off the virtualizer, but you can still use Dolby Atmos. Don't use the spatial audio setting in Sonar because to me, that's not going to sound as good. It adds a lot of reverbs. The problem is with fake surround sound is it's adding reverbs and echoes and delays to simulate a wider soundstage or, I guess, virtual speakers. The problem with that is when you hear extra reverbs and echo, that's more noise that's competing with footsteps. So I typically turn all that off because I don't care to hear that. I just want to hyper-focus on footsteps so I know exactly where they're coming from. It just makes everything more clear. Which leads me to the end. So I hope you found this helpful, and I kind of covered some things that you were curious about. You got to keep in mind, at the end of the day, the most important thing is just having fun and playing the game. None of these settings are going to drastically change your gameplay. This is going to help make the most out of your headset, but realistically right now, the Modern Warfare 2 engine is not that great. There are times where audio and footsteps don't process for some reason. Someone can run right up to you, and you'll never hear a footstep. And then a minute later, you can hear someone like 50 meters away tying their shoe. So I'm assuming the game will change down the road, though they're going to do new audio tuning and patches and stuff like that, I'd imagine, because the beta was very different. So this is based at the time of this review, which is the beginning of November. So anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm really trying to grow the channel. If I can get to 20K subs before the holidays, I'm doing some big giveaways, including audio and gaming stuff. So hope you found this helpful. Thank you so much for the support, as always, and I will see you next time. Bye.